In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the text animator and how we can create more complex animations using multiple iterations of the text animator. So we're going to be creating this fat caterpillar animation. So anyway, this is a kind of simple example, but using these techniques can open up a whole new world of possibilities. As usual, the project files will be available to download. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can find them. So let's get started. So let's just start off by creating a new composition. So we can go up to Composition, New Composition. So we're going to make this 1920 by 1080. I'm going to set this to 23.976 frames per second. Duration, let's set this to 20 seconds because that's what's already on here. So let's name this Main Comp. And after that, we can just hit OK. So now we have our new composition. Let's create our text layer. Now we can do that by right-clicking down in here and going to New, Text. Let's just type in, I'm going to use all caps here, Fat Caterpillar. Alright, so when doing graphic design and stuff like that, you want to choose a font that kind of fits the story you're telling. And this is about a fat caterpillar. So for this, I'm using Jumble, which you can get on the Adobe Fonts page. As you can see, it's a nice little chunky... Alright, let's bring up the size. I don't know, something like 142. Now let's go to the Align panel, and let's align this to the center. There we go. So we have our font. Let's start adding our animation. So if we twirl this open here, we can see text, and then there's an animate. So let's click on this little triangle, and let's go with position. Let's start off with position. All right, so this is going to be the left to right movement. So what we want to do is eventually have it start off screen and then work its way in. So let's move this back, maybe negative, we'll do 100 for now. Just see what that's like. Now, if we twirl open the range selector, we see we have options for start and an offset. What we're going to be animating is actually the offset here. So let's set this back to 0 for now. And let's twirl open the advanced tab. So this is going to be based on characters. We're not going to change that, but we're going to change the shape from square to ramp up. Now, for the offset, we're going to need to go from negative 100 all the way to positive 100. Now this creates the animation effect of the back end kind of moving forward and then the front end following it. Perfect, right? Now let's set the position to maybe negative 150. We'll try that now. So if we take the offset and we put a keyframe in there by clicking on the stopwatch and then go to maybe, I don't know, less than a second, and switch this to 100, it'll automatically create a keyframe. So now we have this. All right, now that's all basic, simple stuff. You've probably done that before. Now here's the problem that we're having. We want this to go from all the way off screen to the center. Now, did you know that you can duplicate your range selectors? So let's take this range selector. Let's rename this by selecting it and hitting the Enter key. And we'll call this FWRD 01, forward 1. So let's take this and let's just duplicate it. Nothing happens yet. So let's hit U to open up the keyframes. Let's move this over. And you'll notice that in the first forward motion, nothing happens until the second one. That's because this bottom range selector is still at negative 100. Now let's just delete our forward 2. And let's go back and let's open up our range selector, our animator. Now what I'm going to do is actually change this back to, actually, let's just do this. Let's undo, 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 undo. There we go. We're back to range selector 1. Now, watch what happens when I take this, call it FWR forward 01. Basically, we're going to try to compound this movement. And the way to do that is to actually duplicate the animator, not the actual range selector. So let's click on our forward 01, which was the animator one, and let's duplicate that. Look at that. Every time we duplicate it, the text moves further to the left, to the left. Now let's just keep going until it's all the way off screen. Now, this is a bit of a pain because if you ever want to change any of these numbers or even the timing of the keyframes, you're going to have to redo it for every single one of these. It's kind of a pain. All right, so let's do this. Let's hover our mouse inside this timeline and hit the tilde key, which that's the key right above the tab key. It's a little squiggly line. That way we can full screen our timeline. So let's just take all our keyframes, starting with the second animator, and let's just move that. I'm holding down Shift while moving it, and that will snap it to this keyframe. So let's take the next one, move it over, take the next group, move it over, and so on. Now the little trick is you have to click on the keyframe and then hit Shift and then move it. Otherwise, if you hold down Shift and then click, it'll just unselect. So let's keep going with that. All right, so let's hit the tilde key again and go back to normal view. So now we have our caterpillar just coming right out. Boom, and it's going to stop in the center. So now we want to work on our upward motion, the kind of, it moving upwards as well as moving sideways. So let's make sure that we get to the last one so we can actually work on this. Now we need to get to the actual animator, not the range selectors of all this. So let's twirl this closed and then twirl it open again. And now you see we have all of our animators. So let's select all of them and close them up and then open the last one. So what we're going to add is the Y position. Now, interesting about the Y position, if you want to move things up, you have to go down. So let's go down into the negative. Now you're going to notice something is happening here. It's starting up and then moving downwards. This is not the motion that we want. Now the problem is that we need to control the X and the Y axis separately. It's setting this back to 0. And the way we can do that is by adding a new position. Now we want to make sure that we click on the actual layer and don't have any of these animators selected. So let's select on layer, go to animate, position. This will add a new animator. Now we can call this upwards 01. All right, so let's bring this up maybe to about 100. All right, now let's open up our range selector, open up the advanced tab, and instead of square or ramp up, we're going to actually set this to smooth. Now, as we animate the offset, you can see this fun little motion. And let's do ourselves a favor by hiding all of the forward motions so we can just select them. I'm shift selecting and then hit the eyeballs and poke it out. Poke those eyeballs out. Anyway. All right, so let's go back down to our upwards motion. Let's go back to the first frame and create an offset keyframe. Now let's hit U so we can open up the other keyframes, and let's bring our playhead to this last keyframe right here. Now we can do that by holding down Shift and moving it, and that will snap it to that keyframe. Now we need to go back down to our last range selector, which is the animator for the upwards motion, and bring that up to positive 100. So the interesting thing about this is not a compounded animation, meaning the more we add, we're not trying to get it higher and higher each time like we did with the forward motion. This is a repeated animation that goes from its starting position halfway through. It'll go through the motion of the animation and then go back to its original starting position. So what that means is we don't actually need to duplicate the animator. We can just duplicate the range selector. So we can do that for as many times as we need. So if we select the range selector and duplicate it a couple times, hit U to bring up the keyframes, and let's offset them the same way we did with the forward motion. And it will keep doing that. Now we can make this even simpler. So let's go back to our upwards animation and let's just delete all the duplicates of our range selectors. Get rid of them. We don't need them because we can make this even simpler. Let's go to the offset stopwatch and alt click on it. This will bring up an expression bar. So we can type a loop expression. So we're going to type loop lowercase l out with an uppercase O parentheses, and we'll do type equals and in quotations cycle. Now we can get out of this in two different ways. We can click outside of it, or if you have a number pad on your keyboard, you can hit the enter on the number pad. So now what we have, if we play this back, is that animation just looping by itself. So we don't need to create any more keyframes. Makes it a lot easier. Just wish we could do that with the forward motion to make that easier, but we can't. We're stuck with a lot of keyframes. All right. Let's close up all of our little animation thingies and let's turn on everything. So now that we have everything turned on, let's play this back and see what happens. I would say for the purposes of doing a fat caterpillar, it's moving a little too fast, but you know what? I'm not going to go through all those keyframes and fix it because you get the idea, right? You get the idea. All right, so what I do want to point out is once it reaches the end here, where it's supposed to be centered and stop moving, because of our loop effect, it's just going to keep jumping up and down. Now, we can fix this in a multitude of complex ways. Or we can just hit U to bring up the keyframes, go to this very last keyframe right here, where all the animation stops and it's in the dead center, close this back up. And we can hit Shift Command D, and that will split the layer right at the playhead. Now what we can do from here is just go to the animations, select them all, delete them. No more animation. So that way, boop, it just sits in place, exactly how we want it. What's that? You want more? Okay, fine. Let's make it into a little more interesting animation. Let's put some more pizzazz into it. So let's select both of our fat caterpillars. Actually, let's do this. Fat caterpillar, end. Fat caterpillar, start. There we go. So this is the animation, and this is the end of the animation, where it doesn't animate. All right, so let's select both of these, pre-compose them. We'll call this text holder. Holder. All right, so now we have our, basic thing. Let's create a background. A new solid background. Let's make this like a green. Let's make this caterpillar-y colors. Let's make a brighter one. All right, let's do that. Let's just start with this color. Let's duplicate that by hitting Command D and then hitting Shift Command Y to bring up the solid settings. Let's make a darker version. Ooh, spooky. All right, so with this layer selected, let's go up to our mask tool and select the ellipse. Now let's double click on it, and that will automatically create a mask. So we can take this mask 1, switch it from add to subtract, and then let's hit F on the keyboard to bring up the feather, and we can just feather it out a whole bunch. There we go. So this is our background. So let's take this and move it down underneath. So now let's add some color to our text. We can do that by going up to Effects and Presets, not Bulge, and typing in Fill. So that's under Generate Fill. Let's add that to our text. And let's make this a nice little yellowy kind of green, maybe less saturated, something like this. Just get a nice little color scheme going on. So let's duplicate our text holder. Whoops. Let's select the actual layer and then duplicate that. So we're going to change this fill to be black. But we're also going to add a Minimax. That's under Channel Minimax. We're going to add that to our top text holder. In fact, what we're going to do, change this to color, change this to stroke. All right, so let's get rid of this Minimax that we accidentally created, or duplicate. And under the real Minimax, we're going to go down to Channel and switch this to Alpha and Color, and then bump up the radius to about 3 for now. We'll see how it goes. So now on top of this, we want to add a CC Composite. That's under Channel, CC Composite. Put that on top of our stroke. And under this drop-down menu for Composite Original, we want to set this to Silhouette Alpha. Now this will make it so the stroke is only visible outside of the alpha channel of the text. Basically, creating a nice little stroke. Now let's bring this down just a bit. I think I'm gonna go with the thin. I'm gonna keep it thin. So a radius of 1 should do. Now, a nice thing about doing it this way, this compositing trick, is that if you were to ever go into the text holder and change this to something else, it will automatically update and you won't have to create new strokes and all that stuff. Now, let's create some 3D-ness. So what I'm going to do, actually, is take both of these, the color and the stroke, and duplicate them. I'm going to move them underneath the original two. So with both of these selected, what I'm going to do, let's actually just go to where it's not moving anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have the Move tool selected by hitting V on the keyboard, and I'm going to use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move this down and over. So we're going to change the color of the second one to be more of a reddish kind of hue and darker. There we go. So we have a reddish brown going on. So one thing we can do to make this even more interesting, to give it that kind of like old cartoony look, is to make sure that we're selected on the top stroke. Let's go to New, Adjustment Layer, and let's add a channel blur. That's under Blur and Sharpen, Channel Blur. Now what this does, it blurs based on the channels of red, green, blue, or alpha. So let's take the red blurriness, let's just bump this up to something like 20. Now you get this like washed out kind of look, this bleeding effect. Now to take this even further, we can add a posterized time. That's under Time, Posterized Time. Let's add that to our adjustment layer. Here we have this set to 24, which the frame rate for our composition is 23.976 or 24 frames per second. We can set this to 12, and that'll cut out half of the frames, so it gives it more of that hand-drawn look. Now another thing that I like to do is add grain. Now I can't give you this obviously, but this is free to download from Gorilla Grain. I'll leave a link in the description to that. So let's add this on top. Now, as you can see, there's a couple problems. We're at 720p, not 1080. So what we can do is right-click on the actual layer, go to Transform, Fit to Comp With. That'll automatically scale it up to fit into the comp. Now, another issue that we're having is it disappears after a while. Now here's a cool trick for looping certain things. So if we right click on the layer again, go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. Let's bring this in just a little bit here. So what this does, it creates two keyframes. Now if I move this keyframe in further, it's going to play this back faster than normal. And conversely, if I move it out this way, it'll play it slower. Now another thing we can do here is if we go just one frame before that last keyframe, put in another keyframe and delete that last one. And with that, we can add the same loop expression that we did for our upwards animation. So we can alt click on the stopwatch, loop in lowercase, out with a capital O, parentheses, type equals, in quotations, cycle. Now all we have to do is take the end of our clip and bring it all the way to the end of our composition. Now, this will repeat indefinitely. So the last thing we need to do is set the blending mode to overlay. Alright, so that's it for today's episode. Now I know the animation's a little bit silly and pretty basic, but it's the idea of using multiple instances of the text animator to create more complex animations than what you could with just using one animator. Alright, if you learned something, if you like what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, sell your soul, whatever YouTube makes you do to actually get notifications from the people you subscribe to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.